The yellow school bus pulled away from Lincoln High School, leaving behind a cloud of diesel smoke and the usual chaos of teenagers heading home. Zoe Williams stood at the curb adjusting the straps of her heavy backpack. She watched as groups of students walked together, laughing and chatting about their weekend plans. 3 months into the school year, she still felt like an outsider looking in. Moving to Millbrook had been harder than she expected. This was her 4th school in 6 years. But somehow this town felt different. Not just different, unwelcoming. Back in California, she had friends who looked like her. Here in this small Ohio town, she could count the number of black students on one hand. Zoe pulled out her phone to check the time. Her mom would be expecting her home by 4:30, and she still had to stop by the library to finish her chemistry homework. The public library was only a 10-minute walk through downtown, but she had learned to take the longer route around the main square. Too many uncomfortable stares from the locals who gathered at the coffee shop. As she walked down Maple Street, Zoe noticed a group of older teenagers hanging around the old gas station. She recognized them from school. They were the ones who seemed to run things around here, the unofficial leaders who somehow made everyone else nervous. She had seen teachers look the other way when they caused trouble in the hallways. Their leader was a tall guy with bleached hair who always wore the same torn leather jacket. His friends called him Tank, though she was pretty sure that wasn't his real name. He had been in her English class for exactly 3 days before getting himself transferred out for what the principal called attitude problems. Zoe quickened her pace, hoping to slip past unnoticed. She had gotten good at being invisible. It was a survival skill she had learned from moving so much. Keep your head down, do your work, and avoid drama at all costs. The library was busier than usual when she arrived. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly librarian, gave her a warm smile from behind the front desk. She was one of the few adults in town who had made Zoe feel genuinely welcome. "Working on that chemistry project again?" Mrs. Patterson asked quietly. "Just finishing up the calculations," Zoe replied, settling into her usual spot by the window. The corner table gave her a clear view of the street while staying out of everyone's way. For the next hour, she worked through her homework with the focused determination that had always been her trademark. Her mom called it military precision, though Zoe had never really understood what that meant. Her mother rarely talked about her work, only that it required a lot of travel and sometimes meant they had to move on short notice. What Zoe did know was that her mom was different from other parents. She woke up at 5 every morning for a workout that would exhaust most people. She kept their apartment organized like a museum display, and she had this way of watching everything around her, like she was constantly calculating distances and exits. "Your mom's in the military, right?" a classmate had asked during lunch last week. "Sort of," Zoe had answered because she honestly wasn't sure. Her mom wore a uniform sometimes, but it wasn't like the Army recruiters who visited their school. Whatever her mom did, it was serious enough that they had moved from California to Ohio with just 2 weeks' notice. The library clock chimed 4:15. Zoe packed up her books and headed for the door, waving goodbye to Mrs. Patterson. The afternoon sun was already getting low, casting long shadows across the empty streets. She decided to take the shortcut through Riverside Park. It would save her 10 minutes, and the park was usually empty this time of day. Most people were either at work or picking up their kids from after-school activities. The park had seen better days. The playground equipment was rusty, and half the benches were covered in graffiti. But it was peaceful, and Zoe appreciated the quiet after a long day of trying to fit in at school. She was halfway across the park when she heard voices behind her. Male voices getting closer. Her stomach tightened as she recognized the laughter. It was the same group from the gas station. "Hey, new girl." Zoe kept walking, pretending she hadn't heard. Her mom had taught her that sometimes the best defense was to avoid confrontation entirely. Keep moving, stay aware, and get to a safe place as quickly as possible. "I'm talking to you." The voices were definitely closer now. Zoe could hear their footsteps on the gravel path. Her heart started beating faster, but she forced herself to maintain a steady pace. Running would only make things worse. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over her mom's contact. But what would she say? That some boys were walking behind her in a public park? Her mom was probably in a meeting at the naval base anyway. The old pavilion was just ahead. If she could make it there, she would be in sight of the main road. Cars passed by regularly and someone would notice if anything happened. You think you're too good to talk to us? Tank's voice was unmistakable now. Zoe felt her hands start to shake, but she kept them steady on her backpack straps. She had dealt with bullies before, though never ones who seemed quite this confident in their own power. The truth was, she was scared. Not just of these particular boys, but of what they represented. She had seen the way some adults in town looked at her family, the whispered conversations that stopped when she walked by, the store clerk who watched her a little too closely, the teacher who seemed surprised when she turned in perfect homework. Her mom had warned her this might happen. Some people are afraid of what they don't understand, she had said during their long drive from California. And unfortunately, some of those people take their fear out on others. Zoe reached the pavilion and finally allowed herself to look back. 4 boys were following her, with Tank in the lead. They weren't trying to hide their intentions anymore. Whatever was about to happen, they wanted her to know they were in control. She thought about her mom, probably just finishing up her day at the base. Commander Lisa Williams, though most people just called her Commander Williams. Zoe had never really understood what her mom did for work, but she knew it was important. Important enough that they had security clearances and moved whenever the Navy needed her somewhere else. What she wouldn't understand until much later was that her mom wasn't just any military officer. She was part of an elite group that most people never even knew existed, the kind of person who got called in when regular solutions weren't enough. But right now, Commander Williams was 20 minutes away, reviewing intelligence reports in a secure facility. She had no idea that her daughter was about to face the kind of situation she had trained her entire adult life to handle. Tank stepped into the pavilion with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. His 3 friends spread out behind him, blocking the main path back to the street. Zoe found herself trapped in the circular stone structure that had probably been beautiful when the park was first built, but now felt like a cage. Finally decided to stop running? Tank asked, his voice carrying that fake friendliness that always came before something bad. We just want to have a conversation. Zoe kept her backpack on and positioned herself near one of the stone pillars. Her mom had taught her to always know where the exits were, but right now her options were limited. The boys had positioned themselves to cut off the obvious escape routes. I don't want any trouble, she said quietly, keeping her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her throat. I was just heading home. See, that's the thing, Tank said, taking another step closer. You've been in our town for months now and you've never bothered to introduce yourself. That's just rude, one of his friends laughed. He was shorter than Tank, but had the kind of mean eyes that suggested he enjoyed other people's pain. Yeah, where are your manners, new girl? Zoe recognized him from the hallways at school. He was always surrounded by younger kids who seemed terrified of him. Teachers had a way of suddenly finding urgent business elsewhere when he was around. My name is Zoe, she said, hoping that giving them what they wanted might diffuse the situation. I'm a junior at Lincoln High. Zoe, Tank repeated, like he was testing how the name felt in his mouth. That's a pretty name. For a pretty girl. His smile made her skin crawl. But you know what I don't understand, Zoe? Why you think you can just waltz into our town and act like you own the place. I don't act like anything, Zoe replied, confusion mixing with her fear. I just go to school and mind my own business. The 3rd boy, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. That's the problem right there. You think you're better than us, walking around with your fancy backpack and your perfect grades like you're some kind of princess. Zoe almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Her backpack was 3 years old and held together with duct tape. Her clothes came from discount stores. She worked twice as hard as most students just to maintain her grades because she knew her mom was counting on her. I don't think I'm better than anyone, she said. I'm just trying to graduate and get into college. College, Tank repeated mockingly. Of course, because people like you always think you deserve more than people like us. The 4th boy had been circling behind her while the others talked. Zoe noticed him moving and shifted position to keep all of them in view. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it. People like me? She asked, though she was beginning to understand what this W is really about. Don't play stupid, Tank said, his fake friendliness dropping away. You know exactly what I mean. You people come into our town thinking you can change things, thinking you can just take over. The words hit her like a slap. She had known this might happen eventually, but hearing it said out loud was different than just feeling the suspicious stares. Her mom had prepared her for this possibility, but theoretical preparation was nothing like the real thing. I'm not trying to take over anything, Zoe said, forcing herself to stay calm. I'm just a student. A student who thinks she's special, the short one said. He pulled out his phone and started recording. Let's see how special you really are. Zoe's stomach dropped as she realized what was happening. This wasn't just harassment. They were planning to humiliate her and share it online. She had seen videos like this before, watched other kids become targets for an entire school's entertainment. Please don't do this, she said, hating how small her voice sounded. I haven't done anything to you. You don't have to do anything, Tank said. You just have to exist. And some of us are getting tired of pretending that's okay. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Zoe's blood freeze. A knife, not a big one, but sharp enough to be dangerous. He didn't point it at her, just held it casually like it was a normal part of the conversation. Now here's what's going to happen, Tank continued. You're going to apologize for thinking you belong here, and then you're going to promise that you and your family will find somewhere else to live. I can't do that, Zoe said, surprised by her own courage. This is our home now. Tank's face darkened. Wrong answer. He took a step forward and Zoe instinctively backed up until she hit the stone pillar. The boy with the phone moved closer, making sure he had a good angle for whatever was about to happen. Maybe you need some help understanding the situation, Tank said, raising the knife slightly. That's when something her mom had taught her kicked in, not the obvious lessons about staying safe and avoiding dangerous situations. The deeper lessons, the ones that came from years of watching a woman who never showed fear, even when she should have. Back off, Zoe said, her voice suddenly stronger. I'm warning you, Tank laughed. You're warning me? Little girl, you are in no position to warn anybody. But something in Zoe's posture had changed. She wasn't cowering anymore. Her mom had made her take self-defense classes at every base they had lived on. She had always complained about it, but now she understood why Commander Williams had insisted. Put the knife away and let me leave, Zoe said. This doesn't have to go any further. Oh, but it does, Tank said. He was close enough now that she could smell his stale cigarette breath. See, you need to learn your place, and we're going to teach you. He reached out with his free hand to grab her backpack, clearly intending to humiliate her by dumping out her books and papers, but Zoe had been waiting for him to get close enough. She grabbed his wrist and twisted, using a move her mom had made her practice 100 times. Tank yelped in surprise and dropped the knife, which clattered across the stone floor of the pavilion. For a moment, everyone froze. The boys were shocked that their victim had fought back. Zoe was shocked that the move had actually worked. But the moment didn't last long. Get her! Tank shouted, shaking his hand where she had twisted it. The other 3 boys moved in at once. Zoe managed to duck under one of them and almost made it to the knife, but the short one tackled her from behind. She hit the ground hard, scraping her knees on the rough stone. Tank retrieved his knife, his face red with anger and embarrassment. You think you're tough now? He snarled. Let's see how tough you are when this goes viral. The boy with the phone was still recording, grinning as he captured Zoe's struggle to get back to her feet. She could already imagine the comments that would follow, the way it would spread through school, the way it would make her mom feel when she inevitably saw it. Hold her still, Tank ordered. 2 of them grabbed her arms while Tank approached with the knife again. This time there was no mistaking his intentions. He wasn't just trying to scare her anymore. Zoe closed her eyes and thought about her mom, Commander Lisa Williams, who had never backed down from anything in her life, who had taught her daughter to be strong, even when everything seemed hopeless. She just hoped her mom would be proud of how she had tried to handle this. And she hoped that somehow her mom would find a way to make these boys pay for what they were about to do. Commander Lisa Williams glanced at her watch as she walked across the parking lot of the naval base. 4:25. Her meeting with the intelligence officers had run longer than expected, but she should still make it home before Zoe. Her daughter usually didn't get back from the library until after 4:30. She had just reached her car when her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Zoe, sent 20 minutes ago. Taking shortcut through park. Home soon, Lisa frowned. They had discussed the park route before, and she had specifically asked Zoe to avoid it. Not because of any specific threat, but because her years of military training had taught her to trust her instincts, and something about that park had always felt off to her. She tried calling Zoe's phone, but it went straight to voicemail. That wasn't necessarily unusual. The cell service in Millbrook was spotty at best. But combined with the park detour, it was enough to trigger Lisa's protective instincts. 20 years in the Navy SEALs had taught her to trust those instincts completely. Lisa started her car and headed toward downtown, taking the route that would bring her past the park. As a single mother in the military, she had learned to balance being protective with giving her daughter independence. But she also knew that Zoe was tough enough to handle most situations that might come up. What Zoe didn't know was exactly how tough her mother really was. Lisa had joined the Navy at 18, desperate to escape a childhood that had been anything but easy. She had excelled in basic training, then pushed herself to qualify for the most elite units the military had to offer. The SEALs had been her life for 2 decades, taking her to places most people couldn't even imagine. She had seen combat in 3 different countries. She had completed missions that would remain classified for the next 50 years. She had earned the respect of men who had never expected to serve alongside a woman. And she had proven herself in situations where failure meant death, but none of that mattered as much as being Zoe's mom. Lisa turned onto Main Street and immediately spotted something that made her stomach clench. Zoe's bright blue backpack was visible through the trees in the park, but she wasn't moving. She appeared to be surrounded by several larger figures. Lisa pulled over and got out of her car, her military training automatically taking over. She assessed the situation quickly. 4 teenage boys, 1 adult female target, an enclosed space that limited escape routes. Her daughter was in immediate danger. She moved through the trees silently, using cover to get closer without being detected. 20 years of covert operations had made stealth second nature to her. She could hear voices now, male voices that carried the ugly tone she had learned to recognize in conflict zones. Around the world, "Hold her still," one of them was saying. Lisa reached the edge of the pavilion and took in the full situation. 4 boys had surrounded Zoe, who was being restrained by 2 of them. A third was recording with his phone. The 4th, clearly the leader, was holding a knife. For a moment, Lisa's vision went red. She had faced enemy combatants who had threatened American lives, and she had dealt with them professionally, efficiently, and without emotion. But this was different. This was her daughter. She forced herself to stay calm and think tactically. Rushing in would only escalate the situation and potentially put Zoe in more danger. She needed to assess the threat level and determine the best approach for neutralizing it. Lisa stepped out of the trees and into the pavilion, her movement so quiet that none of the boys noticed her at first. She positioned herself between them and the main exit, cutting off their escape route just as they had done to Zoe. "Gentlemen," she said in a calm, clear voice that had been developed through years of commanding respect in hostile situations, "I think it's time for you to let my daughter go." The boys spun around in surprise. Tank, still holding the knife, looked her up and down dismissively. Lisa was not particularly tall or imposing, and her civilian clothes gave no hint of her military background. To a teenage bully, she probably looked like just another concerned parent. "Lady, you need to mind your own business," Tank said with a sneer. "We're just having a conversation with your kid here." "I can see exactly what kind of conversation you're having," Lisa replied, her voice still perfectly controlled. "And I'm asking you politely to end it now." The boy with the phone turned the camera toward her, clearly delighted at this new development. "Oh, look who came to save the day," he said mockingly. Lisa noticed that 2 of them were still holding Zoe's arms and that Tank still had the knife. She also noticed that all 4 boys were positioned in a way that would make it difficult for them to support each other if things went wrong for them. "This is your last chance to walk away," Lisa said. "Take it," Tank laughed. "Or what, lady? You're going to call the cops? By the time they get here, this will all be over." He raised the knife slightly. "Maybe you want to join your daughter in learning some manners." That was the moment Tank made his critical mistake. He had just threatened not only Zoe, but Lisa herself. In the military, that would have been enough justification for immediate action. In the civilian world, it was enough to trigger every protective instinct Lisa had developed over 20 years of high-stakes operations. But she gave him one more chance. "Son," she said, and now there was something different in her voice, something that made even Tank pause for a moment. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. Put the knife down, let my daughter go, and walk away. Right now." "Yeah, right," Tank said, but some of his confidence had evaporated. There was something about this woman that was different from what he had expected. something that made his survival instincts start sending warning signals. Lisa looked at Zoe, who was watching her with a mixture of relief and amazement. Her daughter had never seen her in a situation like this, had never witnessed what 2 decades of elite military training looked like when it was unleashed. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," Lisa said gently. "What?" Tank said, confused by the sudden change in tone. Lisa's response was not directed at him. It was directed at Zoe, who immediately understood that her mother was about to do something that she didn't need to see. Tank raised the knife. Whether to threaten Lisa or actually attack her was unclear, but it didn't matter. The moment he made an aggressive movement toward her family, Lisa Williams stopped being a concerned parent and became what she had been trained to be for 20 years. She became a weapon. The transformation was so complete and so sudden that later, when the boys tried to explain what had happened, none of them would be able to describe it accurately. One moment they were dealing with what seemed like an ordinary mom. The next moment they were facing someone who moved like violence itself. Lisa had spent years learning how to neutralize threats quickly, efficiently, and with minimal collateral damage. She had trained with the best fighters in the world, had studied every form of combat that might be useful in the field. But more than that, she had learned to turn off her emotions completely when the situation required it, to become pure calculation and response without hesitation or doubt. Tank never even saw her move. The next 15 seconds unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of precision and control. Lisa moved with the fluid efficiency that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. But she held back the lethal force that had made her legendary among her SEAL teammates. Tank lunged forward with the knife, probably expecting to intimidate this ordinary-looking woman into backing down. Instead, Lisa stepped into his attack, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum against him. A sharp twist that she had practiced until it became muscle memory. And suddenly Tank was face down on the pavilion floor with the knife skittering away across the stone. The boy holding Zoe's left arm let go and took a swing at Lisa, thinking he could catch her off guard while she was dealing with Tank. He learned too late that Lisa's peripheral vision and situational awareness were operating at a level he couldn't comprehend. Without even looking directly at him, she caught his fist, redirected his punch, and sent him stumbling backward into one of the stone pillars. The third boy, the one with the phone, was still recording when Lisa's attention turned to him. He held up the device like it might protect him somehow, but Lisa simply plucked it from his hands with one fluid motion and slipped it into her pocket. Later, that video would provide crucial evidence of what had really happened. "Hey," he protested, reaching for his phone. Lisa caught his reaching hand and applied just enough pressure to a nerve cluster in his wrist to make him yelp and immediately reconsider his priorities. "I don't think so," she said calmly. The fourth boy, the short one who had been holding Zoe's other arm, was the only one still standing and unrestrained. He looked around at his friends. Tank groaning on the ground, one boy slumped against a pillar and the third one cradling his wrist, and made the smart choice. He ran. Lisa let him go. 4 teenagers was manageable. Chasing one through the park while leaving the others unsupervised near her daughter was tactically unsound. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. None of the boys had suffered any permanent injury, but they had all received a very clear demonstration of exactly how outmatched they were. Tank tried to push himself up from the ground, and Lisa placed one foot gently but firmly on his back to keep him down. Not enough pressure to hurt him, but enough to make it clear that getting up wasn't an option. "Stay down," she said in the same calm voice she had used throughout the encounter. "We're going to wait here quietly until the police arrive." "You can't do this," Tank said, his voice muffled against the stone floor. "This is assault. I'll have you arrested." Lisa almost smiled at that. "Son, I have 20 years of training in exactly this kind of situation. Everything I just did was textbook defensive action against an armed threat. Your knife is over there, the video evidence is in my pocket, and you've got 3 witnesses who can confirm that you threatened my daughter." She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with one hand while keeping Tank securely pinned with her foot. 911, what's your emergency? This is Commander Lisa Williams. I need officers dispatched to Riverside Park immediately. I have 4 juveniles in custody who threatened my daughter with a knife. One suspect attempted to flee, but I have the others secured. Ma'am, are you law enforcement? Military. Navy SEALs. The situation is under control, but I need local police to take over custody of the suspects. Zoe, who had been standing frozen during the entire encounter, finally found her voice. Mom, how did you do that? Lisa looked at her daughter, and for the first time since arriving at the park, her expression softened. We'll talk about it later, sweetheart. Are you hurt? No, I'm okay. They scared me, but I'm not hurt. The boy who had hit the pillar was trying to stand up, moving slowly and carefully. Lisa gestured for him to sit back down. Nobody moves until the police get here, she said. This will go much easier for everyone if we just wait calmly. Tank was still face down on the ground, but he hadn't given up trying to talk his way out of the situation. Look, lady, this was just a misunderstanding. Kids being kids, you know. No real harm done. You threatened my daughter with a knife, Lisa said matter-of-factly. You recorded it for your own entertainment. And you did it because of the color of her skin. That's not kids being kids. That's assault with a deadly weapon and a hate crime. The boy with the sore wrist spoke up. We never said anything about race. Lisa looked at him with the kind of steady gaze that had made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. Son, I've been dealing with your type for 20 years. I know exactly what this was about. In the distance, they could hear sirens approaching. Lisa felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. The immediate threat was over, and soon this would become a matter for the civilian justice system. She looked at Zoe again, noting how her daughter was staring at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. Lisa realized that this was probably the first time Zoe had really understood what her mother did for a living. Not the paperwork and meetings that made up most of her current assignment, but the real work, the dangerous work that had defined most of her adult life. Mom, Zoe said quietly, when you said you work in logistics for the Navy. We'll talk about it at home, Lisa said. Right now, let's just focus on making sure these boys understand the consequences of their choices. 2 police cars pulled into the park, followed by a third. Lisa was impressed by the response time and the number of officers. Millbrook might be a small town, but they took armed threats seriously. The lead officer approached the pavilion with his hand near his weapon, clearly unsure what he was walking into. Ma'am, are you the one who called this in? Commander Lisa Williams, she said, showing her military ID. These 4 juveniles threatened my daughter with a knife. I've secured the weapon and the video evidence. One suspect fled toward the residential area north of the park. The officer looked around at the scene, Tank still on the ground, the other 2 boys sitting quietly, and Lisa standing calmly with one foot still keeping Tank pinned. You did all this yourself? Military training, Lisa said simply. I used only the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat and protect my daughter. As more officers arrived and began taking statements, Lisa finally allowed herself to process what had just happened. Her daughter had been in real danger, not the kind of danger that came from normal teenage drama, but the kind that could have ended very badly if she hadn't arrived when she did. She thought about Tank's knife, about the hatred in his voice when he spoke to Zoe, about the way he had been so confident that there would be no consequences for his actions. Lisa had spent her career fighting people who threatened innocent lives. She had just never expected to have to do it in a small-town park to protect her own daughter. But as she watched the police take Tank and his friends into custody, she felt a familiar satisfaction. Justice wasn't always swift and it wasn't always certain, but sometimes, if you were in the right place at the right time with the right skills, you could make sure that the good people were safe and the bad people faced consequences. Todd. I had been one of those times. 3 weeks later, Zoe walked through the front doors of Lincoln High School and noticed something she had never experienced before. Students were looking at her, but not with the suspicious stares she had grown used to. These looks held something different: respect, curiosity, and maybe even a little bit of awe. The story of what had happened in Riverside Park had spread through the school like wildfire, though it had grown in the telling. Some versions had her mother taking down 6 attackers. Others claimed she was a secret agent who had been undercover in Millbrook. The truth was impressive enough, but teenagers had never been known for their restraint when it came to a good story. Tank and 2 of his friends were no longer at Lincoln High. They had been charged with assault with a deadly weapon, attempted kidnapping, and federal hate crime violations. The video from Tank's friend's phone had provided crystal clear evidence of their intentions and their motives. Tank, being 18, was being tried as an adult. The others were in juvenile detention while their cases worked through the system. The fourth boy, the one who had run away, had turned himself in 2 days later with his parents and a lawyer. His cooperation with the investigation had earned him a lighter sentence, but he was still facing serious charges. More importantly, their arrests had opened up a floodgate of other complaints. It turned out that Tank's group had been terrorizing students for months, particularly those who didn't fit their narrow definition of who belonged in Millbrook. The school board, faced with a potential federal investigation, had suddenly found the motivation to take these complaints seriously. Zoe made her way to her locker, which was decorated with a small "Welcome to Lincoln High" banner that someone had hung there over the weekend. She wasn't sure who had put it up, but it made her smile. "Hey, Zoe." She turned to see Ashley Chen, a girl from her chemistry class, approaching with a genuine smile. Ashley had always been friendly, but in the careful way that suggested she wasn't sure if friendship was welcome. "I wanted to thank you," Ashley said. "Thank me for what?" "For what your mom did. For what you did standing up to those guys." Ashley lowered her voice. "Tank and his friends, they've been making life miserable for anyone who doesn't look like them. My little brother got shoved around by them last month, but we were too scared to report it." Zoe felt a complex mix of emotions. She was glad that Tank's reign of terror was over, but she also felt uncomfortable being seen as some kind of hero. "I didn't really do anything. I was just trying to get home from the library." "Are you kidding?" Ashley said. "You stood up to 4 of them even when they had a knife. And then your mom..." She shook her head in amazement. "I heard she took them all down in like 10 seconds. 15, Zoe corrected automatically, then wondered why she was keeping track. Over the past 3 weeks, she had learned more about her mother's real job than she had in the previous 16 years. Commander Lisa Williams wasn't just any Navy officer. She was part of an elite unit that handled some of the most dangerous missions the military undertook, the kind of missions that didn't make it into the news because officially they never happened. The conversation with her mom had been awkward at first. Lisa had clearly struggled with how much to reveal, even to her own daughter. Military secrets were serious business, and some information was classified at levels that even family members couldn't access. But she had shared enough for Zoe to understand that her mother was basically a real-life superhero. Trained in combat, intelligence gathering, and crisis management, the woman who made perfectly organized lunches and insisted on proper study habits was the same person who had spent 2 decades protecting national security. In ways most people couldn't imagine. "It explains a lot," Zoe had said during that conversation. "What do you mean?" "Why you always know where all the exits are. Why you get up at 5 a.m. to exercise. Why you taught me self-defense when other moms were teaching their daughters to braid hair." Lisa had smiled at that. "I taught you to braid hair too." "Yeah, but you also taught me how to break someone's grip if they grabbed my wrist." The bell rang, interrupting Zoe's memory. She grabbed her books and headed to first period, where she found several classmates eager to hear the real story of what had happened in the park. Zoe had gotten better at deflecting these questions, partly because some details were still part of an ongoing investigation, but mostly because she didn't want to be defined by one dramatic incident. She was still the same person she had been before, a student who worked hard, kept mostly to herself, and just wanted to graduate and move on to college. But she couldn't deny that things had changed. Teachers treated her differently now, with a kind of respect that went beyond her academic performance. Other students made an effort to include her in conversations. The suspicious looks from some adults in town had been replaced by nods of acknowledgement. At lunch, Zoe found herself sitting with Ashley and 3 other students who had never shown much interest in talking to her before. The conversation was normal teenage stuff. Complaints about teachers, excitement about the upcoming winter dance, speculation about whether the football team would make it to the playoffs. "Are you going to the dance?" asked Riley, a girl from her English class. Zoe hadn't really thought about it. School dances had never been her thing, partly because she usually didn't know anyone well enough to feel comfortable, and partly because moving so much had taught her not to get too attached to temporary situations. "I don't know," she said. "Maybe. You should come," Ashley said. "It's actually pretty fun, and the DJ they hired is supposed to be really good." For the first time since moving to Millbrook, Zoe felt like she might actually have friends to go with. The realization was both exciting and a little scary. Getting close to people meant it would hurt more when her mom inevitably got transferred again. but maybe that was a problem for future Zoe to worry about. After school, she found her mother waiting in the parking lot, as she had every day since the incident. Lisa had adjusted her work schedule to make sure she could pick Zoe up personally, at least until things settled down completely. "How was your day?" Lisa asked as Zoe got into the car. "Good. Normal. Ashley Chen invited me to the winter dance." "That's great. Are you going to go?" Zoe considered the question as they drove through downtown Millbrook. The town looked the same as it had 3 weeks ago, but somehow it felt different. The coffee shop where she used to feel unwelcome. Stairs now had a "Support Our Local Heroes" sign in the window. Mrs. Patterson at the library had told her that several community members had asked how they could help make the town more welcoming to military families. "Yeah," Zoe said. "I think I'm going to go." They drove in comfortable silence for a while until Zoe asked the question that had been on her mind all day. "Mom, do you think we'll have to move again soon?" Lisa glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "Why do you ask?" "Because for the first time since we moved here, I actually feel like this might be home. And I know that usually means it's time to leave." Lisa was quiet for a long moment. "My assignment here is for 2 years, she said finally. "That means you'll graduate from Lincoln High. As for after that," she shrugged. "A lot can change in 2 years, Zoe smiled. 2 years sounded like forever when you were 16. Long enough to really make friends, to figure out who she wanted to be. To maybe even convince her mom that Millbrook was a place worth staying. As they pulled into their apartment complex, Zoe noticed that someone had left a small basket of cookies by their front door with a note that read, "Thank you for keeping our kids safe." Lisa picked up the basket and read the note, her expression softening in a way that Zoe rarely saw. "You know what?" Lisa said. "I think I might like it here too." That evening, as Zoe worked on her homework at the kitchen table, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just 3 weeks. Not just the external things, the way people treated her, the feeling of belonging somewhere, but the internal things too. She understood now that strength wasn't just about being able to defend yourself physically. It was about knowing who you were and refusing to let anyone make you feel ashamed of it. It was about having people who would stand up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself. And it was about using whatever power you had to protect people who needed protecting. Her mom had taught her all of those lessons, not just through what happened in the park, but through years of quiet example. The difference was that now Zoe was old enough to understand them. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Ashley. "Count me in for the dance. What color dress should I wear?" The response came back almost immediately. "Whatever color makes you feel like yourself." Zoe smiled and went back to her homework, already looking forward to tomorrow.